Hello, everybody. It is Mike Levin. On Sunday, February 14th, 2021. And when last we left off, I showed you how to make this Jupyter Lab icon so that you could have a Python workspace in the first tab of your browser whenever you launch your browser, with Control-1 always getting you back there so that it's really easy to get in the Python mindset again. And the time has come, the walrus said, to get your butt on Linux. Type in server-style headless Linux, which comes with Windows, so to speak, these days, and that's what this video is about. So whether you're a professional software developer or someone who codes casually just for your work like me, when platforms go obsolete, so does all your knowledge and know-how if you haven't gotten your butt onto the next platform du jour. And that can only take you so far, because, you know, after a while you get tired, and that's a young person's game. And you would like things to be getting easier for you and take up tech that you can bank on in the long term. And there actually is such a thing, although I had made a number of mistakes. Boo-hoo, woe was me. And I'm in a don't get fooled again sort of mode. Actually, I've been that way for about 10 years. And I went on a hunt about 10 years ago when I was 40. And first I found Linux. I knew about it, but I really found Linux about 10 years ago. And then I found Python. Again, I knew it, but I really came to know it about 10 years ago. And third, I found Vim and, in parentheses, Git. So that was my choice for obsolescence proofing myself. And in those same 10 years, Microsoft discovered Linux and started building it in, including it with Windows, subject of this video. They hired the creator of Python, and then they bought GitHub, which is the heart and soul of the Git developer community. And of course, on that Vim front, they wrote VS Code. Not the actual order they did it in, but Microsoft has come to a lot of the same conclusions as I have about where developers want and need to be. So, in the spirit of bringing you that same benefit of all that work, I present to you how to install Linux on Windows 10, and the standard warning: this is the less than satisfying type-in style Linux, aka headless or server Linux. And I will show you, not in this video, but I will show you, and have in other videos, how to add graphics support with a Windows X server so you can run full Linux desktop software, graphical user interface desktop software on your Windows 10 system. That is the coming video. But for right now, we're going to cover that somewhat annoying story of how to install Linux on Windows. So it caused quite a bit of excitement that when they announced this May 2 years ago. And we are 2 years later, and where are we? Well, when you do a search on how to install the Windows subsystem for Linux, this ugly page comes up. So I thought to myself, maybe I'll go to the Bing search engine and search on how to install WSL. Technically WSL2. But as far as official Microsoft pages, that one keeps popping up. This one, which is actually from September of last year, not really confidence building. And when you read through it, it says there's a simplified install and then a manual install. And the simplified install, they're saying, is for Windows insiders. And the manual install, which has all these steps, is presumably for non-Windows insiders. Now, I am on the Windows Insiders program, but I don't have this machine set up that way. What do I mean set up that way? Well, for those who don't know it, and I'm probably not going to go ahead and activate it, but if you go into your system settings, and it's not that one, system apps, maybe it's apps, no, somewhere in there is being a Windows developer, being on the inside track, accounts, sync your accounts. I hope I don't give stuff away here. You already know my email address. But under one of these is upgrading yourself to a Windows Insider program. There it is. It's on update. Who would have guessed? So if you go into that, you can choose which Insider program you want to be on. There's the slow track and the fast track. Allow it to stay in Windows. So it's going to give you all sorts of warnings if you go ahead with this. To manage the Windows device and allow us to. You'll need to turn on optional diagnostic data so that in exchange for you being on the Insider program, Microsoft gets to see statistics about your machine usage, give up a little privacy for a little inside track, such as it were. So I've been doing that on my other laptop for the past number of years, but I don't think it's necessary anymore. I'm going to try and do this without being on the Insider program, and I might end up with WSL1 instead of WSL2, and that's another story. I'll do the upgrade if that occurs, but I'm going to try and get rid of all the rigmarole because the advice you get out there on how to do this is, this is not Windows ships with Linux as the hype would believe you, and make you believe. It's all this type in this and type in that. But from my little bit of research going, around and running Microsoft's thing, it doesn't seem like it should be that complicated. So I did find out that if you simply go into settings and you go into apps, you can now go into programs and features, and then you can go into turn Windows features on or off, and then you can scroll down to Windows Subsystem for Linux. Now this may actually require a reboot, and if it does, I will do this video in 2 parts. But there you go. That's the Windows Subsystem for Linux. I hit OK. Searching for required files. Windows needs to reboot your PC to finish installing the changes. Okay, I just restarted, and you can see how very stripped down my Windows system is after a restart when nothing is running. I only really have showing what is for my keyboard shortcuts, for some neat pen features, for showing hidden stuff, running software, and one little icon for the start menu. This is a shimmed OS the way I like them. I do the same thing with Mac and Linux desktops. All OSs are the same. They're just your way of getting to this, a text editor, Control-Alt-J right now for me, which is Notepad, my text editor, until this process is done and I get myself on Vim. This window here, where I run Jupyter Lab, which actually forces my web browser to run, with Jupyter Lab in the first tab. Now I'll go ahead and restore pages because there were some interesting pages there. Jupyter Lab happily runs multiple times in your tabs. It's just engineered so well from a user's perspective. On my last video, I talked about like Fire and Duck or something, so I went back and looked it up. It's Fire in Motion by Joel Spolsky, a popular software developer and writer. And this is all about how vendors are trying to lure you into long-term dependency on their products, and how there is a forced upgrade cycle to keep you retraining and relearning so that they, as the tool providers, the vendors themselves, can always be at the top of the food chain, such as it were. And a good read. I encourage you to do that, because much of what I'm doing is to not be a victim of Fire in Motion. And Microsoft knows that and is trying to keep you on their platform, even though you're trying to get away from their main techniques of turning you into long-term paying customers. So anywho, this gobbledygook is what I'm trying to avoid here. I, through system settings, activated WSL, which I believe turns on the hardware hypervisor level. So one quick diagram before I move on. Control-Alt-R to bring up ArtRage, and grab my stylus if I can find it here. About a second ago, must have dropped it. It's okay. Ow, recover. So that gets me back my black screen, but not my stylus. I was sitting on it. Not gonna edit. You got your, once again, your hardware level. So this is your actual real hardware. Now somewhere in there, there's this special little privileged bit that users can't really do much with. And that's, you know, your there's been lots of different names for it over the years. Master boot track, master boot record, the thing that starts your whole boot process, which traditionally hands control over to your OS, your one OS running on the machine. Okay, so the new trend, and it's not always activated, but is to have another OS in here, a much smaller and more highly privileged OS, almost not an OS. It's a very, very tiny OS, and it has been called, mostly because of marketing, the hypervisor. It started out as supervisor, but because of Intel marketing, it's called the hypervisor. And what that has the ability to do now is to make it so that instead of one big OS, I probably should have thought this ahead and done layers, but I'll use my eraser. The hypervisor is significantly more privileged than the OS that's running, that the user is interacting with, and it's more privileged than most things on the system. In fact, to such an extent that it can parcel up all the resources of your machine however it likes, and how it generally likes is into separate smaller OSs. And when they say Linux runs side by side with Windows, it's because a hardware level hypervisor is in there making that magic happen. So this reboot was basically, probably ensuring that all this magic stuff here is turned on. It is not necessarily the case that these hardware capabilities are turned on to get this piece here. Oftentimes it's just deactivated because there are security implications. It's a virtual machine technology. It's the same thing that's used in server farms and stuff. My head's probably going to be up there as a talking head, so I'll get rid of that. So this is the modern talk about virtual machines. There's other discussions of virtual machines, but this is the one that runs at a higher privilege, in a higher privileged context on your hardware, and which is why this is not a, you know, a substandard solution for like emulating with these fragile balloons that pop and go away. This is running with as much privilege as Windows is itself. And in fact, there's this dynamic sizing stuff so that things get bigger and smaller based on how much resources are needed. It's, you know, insanely tricky and complicated, and I don't like to think about it. I just like to get the advantage of it. So on that note, I am going to just grab for the brass ring here. Does people still know that expression? I'm going to go into the Microsoft Store. Now that I activated the Windows Subsystem for Linux using the system program, I see no reason why I shouldn't be able to search for Ubuntu 20.04 long-term release. There's two of them. Oh, that's 18.04. This is what I had been using. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to move to 20.04, the latest long-term service release for Ubuntu. And if I can hit get and it starts the install, then all that craziness that people find when they do that search is not necessarily required. Look at that. Look at that. So just a reminder, despite all my diagramming and my stopping to explain things, I have so far only checked one checkbox under settings and then gone into the web store and downloaded Ubuntu. Okay. I'll pin it to start. Why not? And then I'll launch it from there. Let's see what happens. Installing. This might take a few minutes. And it is a Windows command prompt window that this is occurring through. I do not think it's PowerShell, but it really doesn't matter either way. Underneath all of this, the part that it's keeping us from seeing and having to deal with necessarily is WSL.exe that lives in your system, probably 32, I would hope 64, but lives in your system folder along with all your other Windows commands, just like any other Windows command. It's just thrown in there inconspicuously, WSL.exe, but it does so very much. Let's see. Enter a new Unix username. So I'm going to set it up a lot like, let's see, a lot like a generic server. I'm going to give it the name Ubuntu. It's the Ubuntu user on Ubuntu. And a password, I'm going to give it no password, retype password. It insists, okay. I give it one. Look at that. Ubuntu at desktop something or other. This message is shown once a day. To disable it, please create the hush login file. So you create this hush login file, or this is going to be shown once a day. Now the question is Ubuntu really installed? The list of available updates is more than a week old. To check for new updates, it's telling you run sudo apt update. So it's not the hyphenated version. So now that this is happening, let me just close out of the store, make this full screen, make it so that you can actually see it. And that probably was the whole Windows subsystem install, although I will check whether it's version 1 or 2 as far as WSL, because there are two versions. One from long ago that did not use this virtual machine hardware level trick for partitioning system resources. It used port mapping and, shim tricks. So this new one, WSL2, is better, but I'm not sure if I'm on it. So what am I doing here? Oh yeah, I'm just changing my font. I'm going to go with 28. Make it nice and big. Okay. First things first. Just close out of it. Do what most users will do at this point. And then bring it back up with that icon, right? There it is, back almost instantly. Is that Linux? Well, let me type in ls. Doesn't show much, but that might be because it's in my home directory. cd to root of the system, ls. Well, that looks like Linux with maybe some Windows mixed in. So it's done. So I'm going to cd back to my home directory, ~/ and then I'm going to go with sudo. That's the command to give you elevated super user privileges. So super user do apt-get. They have the unhyphenated versions. They've simplified the program that goes with the Debian package manager, which was what I'm doing. But I know the older commands that are hyphenated. So to update the Debian package manager to get the new software repo directory, sudo apt-get update. This will update my local repository of Ubuntu software is what it is. And if you haven't heard me talk about it a zillion times, Ubuntu is the version of Linux that comes from a company called Canonical that Microsoft chose to do this with. It's a highly popular, highly supported, lots and lots of drivers written, probably the reason they chose it, and a huge repository of free and open source software that you can just, apt-get install a whole world of stuff. And the main developer toolchain, quite frankly, for, the main developer tool chains for development in the world. So much so that Microsoft is including this so that people just don't flock off the Microsoft platform for real programming. So now that was all just updating a local software repo. Shall I make you suffer through a real actual update? Well, I'll show you how much will be updated if I did. Sudo apt-get, almost all the same command, but whereas I did update before, now I'm going to do upgrade. And that's going to look at what I just downloaded and compare it to what I have installed on my machine and offer to upgrade everything. And I'm going to answer, yeah, I'll let you watch an Ubuntu upgrade. It'll do you some good. So this is a lot like the automatic Windows upgrades that go on mostly in the background for people all the time these days. Right now, developers on Linux take a little more responsibility generally for their own updates. They don't turn this stuff on auto on all that much because of the kind of stuff you're running. You don't want the software necessarily updating underneath of you all the time. And it's also interesting to look at things. There's Perl that just scrolled by. So Perl is still a part of the Linux distribution. There's a lot of stuff. We talk about the timeless tools of tech. You want to know what some of the timeless tools of tech are? Look at the things that auto install with Linux as it goes through this. And you'll see the names of lots of different tools that are always there, sitting there to work for you. Now, granted, most of them are much too techy for people to incorporate into their everyday lives necessarily, but there's Python 3.8, so there are gems in there. And when I say learn Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, I do not mean all of it. I just mean the very best parts. I'll let you see. I'll make some arts. Linux. Enough to boot. Enough to boot. Let's put your app. Because have no doubt, Linux is your way of running your app. I wrote something in Python. How do I run it? Well, find something that runs Linux. It probably supports Python, and it probably supports your app, as long as the versions are all supported. Okay, and Python. And that is write your app. and then of course Vim. And I'll put in parentheses now because, you know, I'm leading you towards Jupyter Lab. And that's also write your app. So, you know, this is the language, of course, here, and this is the text editor. See how that's doing. It's still going. You know, it's a lot to install. I went just a little too big with the font. I made it bigger so that you can see it, but you can see now the reason I choose 24 instead of 28 so often. These lines are just a little bit less wrapped in a 24-point font on this resolution I'm using right now. So this looks like the end of it. It did all those gets. Now it's doing all the extracting, preparing, unpacking. It's not really the end of it. It's the end of the downloading. It's the end of all the gets. Now you see it doing the system stuff. Very interesting. A lot of insight. And this update and upgrade is really just like the Windows updates you do after a fresh window install. You might go, oh, this is a strike against Linux. There's all this stuff you have to do. Well, this is better than Windows. After this is done, I'm not even going to reboot. So once in a blue moon, they ask you to reboot. I don't even think I recall that. So somehow or other, Linux has ways that they can install new boot kernels and not even ask you to reboot, it appears, because sometimes you see the boot kernel as being one of the things here. Init RAM FS. These are really low-level things they're updating. Init RAM FS has a fascinating story behind it. It's not really a command you run, but it's like a RAM disk. When I told you over here about the this stuff here, it's not really the full story. There is in fact something that goes in here. After the boot, it hands it to a really fast OS, which is typically init RAM FS. So you can see initialization in RAM, initialization in RAM file system, which then hands it over to an OS more like this. But a lot of the traditional stuff is getting upended these days as fancier and fancier shell games are possible with what's actually hosting what and which operating system is in charge. But it's good to have an understanding of it. It's good to know how this stuff was traditionally done, how it's subtly changing, and how you can take advantage of it. This is one of those take advantage of it things because now you've got a Windows, now you've got a Linux subsystem on Windows in the voice of Hans Gruber. Ho, ho, ho. And yeah, it's like you're super powered when this is done. I can't wait to show you installing software with the Debian repository system. But while that's going on, I'll just finish up this thought. That was boring and techie long enough. I'm going to add this to the bottom of my to-do. My to-do right now is way back here in February's entry, I mean February 10th's entry, but Windows Terminal, that has to come real soon. Unified, oh, that's already there. Install the Unified Microsoft Terminal. Because when you see this install going on over here, it's not even install when you saw the install going on. Now it's the Linux terminal here. There's no tabs. This is still basically the Windows command prompt. This is old-fashioned COM. If I put that over there and started typing command prompt here, this and this are almost the same technical kind of thing going on Windows-wise. You can't get tabs. It's very limited. This is the WSL program running through a command window, and it gets much, much better. However, it is worth pointing out that this is Linux. Might not look like it, but all that hullabaloo that people are making about Linux shipping with Windows, this is it. ls, cd, cd root, just to see that it really is a Linux system, because you're in home where there isn't very much. cd user, this is your personal user directory. ls, cd local, place where a lot of your own stuff is put. cd bin, binaries that you yourself drop in. It's empty. But you know, if we looked in the bin directory of something other than the user space, these upper level directories indicate, like, you know, whose space it is. So this is in the user space, everything that's for you. Now if I went to cd home, ls, pwd, my current working directory, I do not believe that is the same thing as your home directory on the Windows side, but one of the things I'm going to be doing is unifying the Windows side with the Linux side, so I can share files seamlessly in something that's going to look like my home directory. See how it says home/Ubuntu? That's because I chose Ubuntu as my username. Now that location is probably accessible from the Windows side, but I'm going to get to that later. The main thing before I wrap up this video is check whether this is WSL 1 or 2. If I type exit, it's going to close out of the whole terminal entirely. So what I really want is that COM window that I had going before, so that I can access the WSL command. You remember I said WSL is just sitting there in my directory, and it executed the command and didn't like really do anything. So as these commands are, okay, oh, not found, interesting. Yeah, okay, so I am in Ubuntu. I'm making a classic mistake. I typed WSL and it dropped me into Linux just that fast. WSL from here. There's an interesting mistake, right? Linux prompt, there's a tremendous insight. Just launching WSL from a command prompt drops you instantaneously into your Linux machine. That speed there is like Linux booting. It's not really, but Microsoft is doing tricks to make it seem like it is. So I want to do the WSL commands before it enters Linux to see what's there. Traditionally, it's --help, and there it is. You can see all the commands that go with it, and we're going to look for the one that tells us what distribution we're running. All right, there's an inventory of files, usage, WSL, argument, options, command line. If no command line is provided, it launches the default shell. Run the specified distribution, user export list, there, --L or single -L, that's what we're looking for. WSL-L. That lists our Ubuntu's. This is the default. So now we're going to have to look for something up here that's probably like verbatim in order to see which versions. Verbose -V. Show detailed information about the distribution. And if this is version 2, I wrap this up. If it's version 1, I wrap it up and set the stage for a new video about upgrading from WSL 1 to 2. WSL, boy, that must be painful watching my dyslexic, sloppy typing. Not really dyslexic, but I might be. WSL-L-V. Version 1. Dun, dun. Should I go for an upgrade right here while we're talking? Why not? Let's take a look in the WSL command itself. It's got to be in there. Export to a tar file, import. We want to avoid that if we can. Specify the version to use for the new distribution. Sets the distribution, set default version. Set default version. Changes the default install version for new distributions. Yowzers. It might be easier to do that and then to install it fresh from the web store. So I am going to set the default version to 2 initially. Oh, set version changes the version of the specified distribution. Okay, so set version, distro, and then version. So this is the very important thing. We're going to want to copy that for exact typing. We're also going to need the one that came up under the verbose list. That exact name is going to need to go in there. So first WSL, then the set version, version name, and 2. And this should be an upgrade. Conversion in progress. This may take a few minutes. For information on key differences with WSL2, please visit. And then it says WSL2 requires an update to its kernel component. For information, visit this here. So its kernel component needs an upgrade in order to upgrade my Ubuntu version to WSL2, which has certain performance, mostly performance advantages. Download the Linux kernel update package. We really are on a Microsoft site. WSL2 Linux kernel update package for 64K machines. Let's just hit this thing home and try and make this a Valentine's Day gift. Okay. So the last message was, it required this component and referred to that website. This new message is saying, please enable the virtual machine platform Windows feature. Is that the same address? No, that's a different address. So we follow it. See, it's always Alice in Wonderland drink me. I'll tell you, everything in tech. You want to know tech? Read Alice in Wonderland. Read all 14 books of The Wizard of Oz, and you'll know tech. The message is virtualization enabled. Enable optional WSL and virtual machine components. Download the latest kernel. Sets WSL as the default. and then you download and install the Linux distribution. So I showed you it happening under WSL1. So it's easy to fall into this trap of getting WSL1 on your machine. I would have liked to have avoided that, but hey, I'll fall on this, I'll impale myself on this trap so you don't have to. So that's what I just got. Download that latest package. Note if you're using an ARM64. Once the installation is complete, move to the next step, setting WSL as your default version when installing new Linux distributions. Okay, so I'm going to do this. And it still says, please enable the virtual machine platform. Before installing WSL2, you must enable the virtual machine platform. Your machine will require virtualization capabilities. Oh, so you can't get away from one of these techie things. Okay, so we're going to have to type that in, they say, to PowerShell. So, all right, fine. Ugh, PowerPoint. Ugh. Error 740. Elevated permissions are required to run. Okay. One more time. PowerShell. PowerShell. Right click. Run as administrator. Yes. Paste. Enter. Oh, now it's doing something. Look at that. Look at that. Completed successfully. Now we go over here. One more time. No. Probably is going to require a reboot, isn't it? I should probably read these things better. It's going to require a reboot. Restart your machine. Yeah. See, hypervisor stuff, the stuff I was talking about in that other thing here. This is so operating system low level. There's no way you can get away with not doing a machine restart. That explains why I didn't have one before. So this will be an edited video in 3 clumps, 2 restarts. I hope this should be a popular video too, showing people how to do this. And we're back after an immediate reboot, and we're going to jump right into command prompt. I'm doing that enough that at least for now I will pin that to start. So I can bring up my command prompts pretty easy. It remembered the large type. That's good. And it did not remember my commands. But you'll see if I do WSL, it'll just jump into the installed Ubuntu. I can exit out of that. And I can do WSL-list. I can do -list-verbose. And maybe I can combine -l-v on the same line. Nope. So this shows you what's running. I'm trying to get this from a 1 to a 2 now. And there was a command to do an upgrade. So we can do WSL-h for help, or --help would have done the same thing. And set version. So once again, we are going to try to do it without doing a reinstall of the WSL1 to 2, the Ubuntu, the store reinstall. One of the things I can do probably now is I can just uninstall that. It would ruin the time I wasted doing the update and the upgrades, but that's no big deal. However, it might be more interesting to see doing an upgrade of a WSL1 to 2 for a moment, and if that doesn't work, we'll uninstall the old Ubuntu and reinstall it. So set default version to 2. Okay, it has allowed me to do that. That's a first major success after the second restart in this process. Now we're going to try setting the version of a particular distro. Again, we do our WSL-L-V to get its exact name, because we're going to need its exact name. We want this exact command, set-version, right? See that? Sometimes you don't have the single hyphen version of some of these commands. For the longer things, you got to use the double hyphen versions. This is WSL set version to 2. Conversion in progress. This may take a few minutes. Hopefully it's just a few minutes. I do recall perhaps having done this process 2, maybe 3 times in the past, experimenting. And if it doesn't go real quick, hopefully from being a fresh install, being newer software potentially than the last time I did it, then I will stop it and uninstall Ubuntu and do a new install. I'll think about anything I can talk about or show you in the meantime. It's probably locked up in other attempts to open it. So here, again, I can open that command prompt easily like that and watch what happens. Remember when I typed WSL before, it would pop into it almost instantaneously. It should not be able to now because it's in the midst of an upgrade. And you can see it would have loaded already if it could have. So why don't we take a look for those key differences, right? We've been looking at these little links it's been giving us so far. Why am I doing this? Why am I going from it lost my default background. That's ugly. I'll just go with it out of the sake of speed. Why am I going from WSL1 to WSL2? That's a 2 there. While that's doing its thing, it's a new version of the subsystem for Linux. Increased performance, adding full system call compatibility. Same user experience as WSL1, which is why I'm not going to do any additional updates or upgrades and waste your time. You saw that happen once. They don't really tell you all that fun nitty-gritty stuff. The networking context changes with a virtual LAN. There's all kinds of interesting stuff. Hey, there, it's done. Conversion complete. WSL from here. Exit. WSL-L-V. And there it is, version 2. This is a fully successful demonstration. The actual installed version still has the updates and the upgrades that I applied. So whenever I want to learn, whenever I want to run Unix now, I can just go like this. And then, of course, I mean, this is not where we're going ultimately. Windows Terminal is going to really be what I'm doing. You're going to love Windows Terminal. But I can hit properties on this, give it a shortcut, Control-Alt-U for Ubuntu. Okay, so I'm sitting here. I'll make it so that I have nothing else going. And my point always that Windows is nothing more than a shim operating system to real operating systems is because you pull it up, it's empty, it's unopinionated, there's not much going on, it's the same as you can make any other system look. And then you hit your keyboard shortcut for your Unix terminal and you got it, and you're in business. Of course, I'm going to make it full screen, and it's going to be multi-tabbed and all the rest of the modern conveniences people expect out of their Linux/Unix shells, which the command prompt doesn't quite give you yet. The command prompt is working as the outer shim. There's a ziggurat of shims here. Somewhere under there, there's probably DOS, then there's Windows, and then there's another DOS, and then there's Ubuntu. So that's the way things are these days. Virtualization technologies and optimizations make it so that you can hardly tell that's going on anymore. But I'm not going to do it, but sudo apt-get install vim. That's just a preview to the next video. Oh, already installed. See, it's in there. Vim. That's my text editor. I'll be pulling repos down from GitHub, and I'll have all my work here. And my work journal, which currently I usually have over here now on Notepad, will be brought up in Vim, and I'll settle into my new machine properly now that my machine is a very Linux style machine again. So that's it. I'll do more videos in the future that show you how to get graphics on it, because you can. I do Chrome automation where my scripts are written in the whole Python Ubuntu world, but as Chrome pops up in non-headless mode, it's Linux Chrome that I watch running here on my Windows desktop. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.